Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of the Monkey webinar. In this episode, we're going to focus on how to scale your SaaS in Europe and the US.
And of course, the best to invite a person who worked in both markets and has a hands-on experience on how to do it according to different challenges and cultural differences and environment for growing business. So we have today Anita with us. She is a council member of Forbes and product marketing leader, and she will share with us her experience and give you really hands-on advice on how can you scale your SaaS in Europe or in the US and what should you be paying attention to. Welcome, Anita.
Welcome with us.
Thanks so much, Natalia and Hila. I'm very excited to be having this exciting conversation with you today, trying to dissect and also share and learn some of my key experiences in expanding SaaS products in the United States and in Europe. Looking forward to an exciting conversation with you both today.
Thank you so much. So perhaps to start with, can you give us a little bit of a background? Where have you been working? How did you move to the US? Where are you now in Europe or there? And also a bit of walkthrough, what are the companies you had experience with?
Sure, sounds good. So as you know, my name is Anita, and I have around 15 plus years of experience overall in SaaS. I've worked across a range of products, right from supply chain, industrial AI to machine learning, big data, and predictive maintenance. I was born in India. I was raised there for a good of my high school education. And after that, I decided to pursue my higher studies. I did my engineering in India, and then I moved to the United Kingdom to pursue my master's. I worked there for a couple of years and then kind of decided that what is the next opportunity that's going to come my way, and I pursued something in the United States for a couple of years from there. And then life took a kind of a full turn, and I got married, and I decided to focus on my personal family life as well, in addition to my professional life. And for a while, me and my husband were operating in different countries, and then we decided to work together. So that brings me to Europe and in Germany, and my husband currently works here. So after doing quite a bit of stunt across continents and countries, we decided that it's time to kind of really enjoy the scenic Europe and also explore some career opportunities here. So that's what brought me to Europe. Currently, I'm based in Germany, in Mannheim. I've been living here for the past 4+ years. Really like the whole central location opportunity to travel across beautiful countries in Europe and also experience a lot of the German culture. Excited to collaborate and learn with the entire European ecosystem. I started my career in the European ecosystem, but then I got a little bit out of touch working in the Silicon Valley for a bit, and now I'm back to it. So there's a lot that's changed over the years, and it's exciting to see the amount and pace at which things have changed, for the good, and what are some of the nuances in which companies are rapidly scaling on both the sides of the geography, and what does this mean in terms of opportunities as a whole for the sector, and in terms of career opportunities as well.
Yeah, wow. Sounds like you already had a very rich experience, and that you experienced also both of the SaaS markets in the US and Europe. So you really are the best person to answer those questions for us. And I was wondering, since you experienced both those markets, what are the main differences you spotted between the American SaaS market and the European one?
Yeah, I think there are different reasons why companies typically try to expand into different markets. But I think fundamentally, one of the primary reasons why companies in Europe want to expand into US is it's one of the biggest markets that they have. And it's extremely diverse as well. Also, it means that it offers you a very strong network of talent, investments, stronger and slightly advanced, sophisticated technology partnerships that you can build and nurture as well over a certain period of time. And of course, the amount of certain intangible benefits also that come along with it in the process, because the market happens to be pretty big. The competition is much higher. which means that invariably companies tend to kind of really push themselves a little bit more harder when it comes to sustaining and competing in a competitive environment, I would say. I think for the primary reason why a lot of American companies really want to expand in Europe is it is the second biggest market compared to Europe and Asia. I think Europe offers a lot more diversity in terms of the strategic location and a lot of the customers that are available in the market. So I think it makes one of the best sense for them to really expand. There are enough proven studies and numbers that say that well-run SaaS companies should typically have 30% of their 30% of their revenue coming from the European side. So that it strategically makes a good decision for them to look at Europe as one of the second markets that they would like to expand. While you understand that these are the primary reasons, I think there are a lot of differences that come in place as well, which makes the whole process of expansion slightly challenging, I would say. The first difference essentially is the market. In US, if you look at the primary market, to a large extent, you can say that it's centralized and homogeneous. Whereas in Europe, you're pretty much dealing with 28 plus different countries and languages, which makes it highly fragmented and extremely challenging in terms of understanding where do you begin and how do you scale from there. So that's as far as the market is concerned. I thought you wanted to say something. Maybe I just went with the flow. I can take a pause and then react.
No. We can also ask the questions later. But for example, now you're speaking that Europe is so diverse and has 29 countries to start with, and of course each market have their local cultures, specialties. So, is there any specific country in Europe that is easier to enter with? Or maybe a specific state? I mean, in US, I believe it's either Silicon Valley, it's easier to enter there and target that specific segment, or New York region, because it's also another hub for entrepreneurship. But in terms, like in Europe, is there any country where it's easier, or any country just have their specialty and then you just go with the flow?
I think definitely language is one of the biggest drivers, I would say. So if you look at the amount of effort that it takes a typical American SaaS company to really localize the product, I think looking at the markets where English probably is a slightly bigger composition of the mix might make more logical sense for them. But there are enough successful companies that have come and scaled pretty much very well in spaces like London, spaces like Amsterdam, Berlin, like is also picking up a good momentum, I would say. So I think these are some of the good ones that are typically having a good mix of English speaking. Not to say that English is probably the must-have thing, but it happens to be one of the largest audience that caters to a more wider audience space. So I think that definitely makes it like a good market for sure. Also, sourcing talent is far easier here in these cities compared to other cities. So there's a good mix that's coming in terms of talent that's moving in and around on both sides, I would say. But there's also a good amount of best practices that are being nurtured across the world as the whole technology world is getting reshaped by modern ways of development, with the whole COVID-19 coming in and remote working also kind of picking up a lot of momentum. I think that's all kind of really providing a broader pool of talent, network, and capital to most companies, I would say.
But I would guess there's a lot of cultural differences between the two continents, between the two markets. Are there any that you think are the most important ones to keep in mind when actually scaling a SaaS startup into these markets?
Yeah, I think definitely culturally there are different parameters that you have to keep in mind. Definitely in terms of the working styles, in terms of how do you really structure your teams, what is the working environment going to really look like, what is the execution, those things really definitely matter. Also, I think this is where the entire cultural aspect of communication and delegation also comes into play. While it's centralized as the leadership concept, But I think there are some cultural nuances in which, how do you share feedbacks? How do you talk to people? How do you delegate with people? How do you take them along? Especially when you're working in a lot of remote setups. On top of it, you have these cultural challenges as well. So I think understanding and kind of being mindful of how things really roll or with certain types of cultures is extremely important. For example, I think it's quite normal to be direct here in Europe, whether it's a positive or a bad feedback, for example. While it is appreciable in the United States, but I would have a very polished way of guiding my peer or maybe my reportee as well to kind of, how can they improve? How can they kind of optimize certain things, or what's a better way of doing it, right? So feedback is one of those complex things that we're always trying to do. The second scenario is when you're even doing some brainstorming sessions, I would say, you have to make sure that the whole team feels collaborative and also tries to engage. And it's not like a one-way direction where leaders have already taken a lot of decisions and they're coming and telling the teams to start execution or start discussing tasks. I think that is also fundamentally a different approach. A lot of method and structure in general is preferred in Europe. Whereas in the United States, I feel you can actually kind of have a very active and diverse discussion. And then kind of come to conclusions in terms of what is the strategy going to be like, right? So those are some subtle differences, I would say. But besides that, end of the day, people are people. You still have to understand what you want to drive and accomplish. But I think cultural differences are extremely important to keep in mind when you're working.
Yeah, indeed. And when it comes to positioning your SaaS on the market, is there something specific you should emphasize on when building your message to position SaaS? So maybe in Europe, they focus more on the features. In the US, they focus more on the value. Or is there any way your messaging should be different compared to different markets?
Yes, I definitely do think that messaging and positioning definitely needs to be adapted in different markets. In my experience, what I have seen is, as a product marketing leader, the core value proposition of what your product does fundamentally may not change. But the way you communicate it, the way you package it, the way you try to put a pricing on it, all of that is really dependent on what the market needs and what the market is ready to pay for it. And this really fundamentally starts with understanding what do the same target personas or the ideal customer profile, what typically companies call them as, what do they really respond well with, right? When I say that the core value proposition fundamentally does not change a lot, the product seems to solve one particular problem. It doesn't matter which part of the geography that person is going to use it, right? But the way in which the same persona would respond would vary a bit. For example, in the United States, I think the way to correctly, or probably, at least in my experience of what has worked well over the years after experience, is you need to talk about bigger things. You need to talk about transformation. Your messaging has to be more inspiring. It can be more fun. It's not meant to completely reveal what it needs to do, but the job of the messaging is to excite and entice people, kind of take them along on the journey of what's the big impact, what's the big outcome that we can do. So it's more on the visionary side, I would say. And it's more futuristic as well. You could be talking about a lot of things that the product can do today, but you're still not going to explain in terms of its immediate impact as is. You have to be a little bit more futuristic in terms of explaining and packaging it. That's more important. So packaging is extremely important in the United States, I would say. When it comes to Europe, I think what really works well here is when you're very direct, when you're more on features, and you have a very straightforward and a simple way of explaining and saying the as is. So the more you try to add more drama to it, I think in my experience, it's kind of not really worked well that much. as much as you can keep it to the point, direct and formal to a large extent. Say, for example, Germany happens in Germany. It's more of a nuance where you have a very formal way of expressing your landing pages or expressing your product descriptions or even kind of communicating your value proposition is extremely formal, right? And in the context of the European sector, German happens to be one of the largest spoken languages. So maybe you can, to a large extent, associate that as one of the ways in which it happens. But of course, there's a Dutch, of course, there's French, etc. There are some nuances involved in it as well. But in general, when you look at the whole approach, I think the simpler that you keep, the more direct to the point that you come into, I think it works well.
I have just one follow-up question, sorry. I heard from some of my colleagues in the SaaS industry that when they deal with the US market, people also judge about your product based on the pricing. So there is this suspicion if compared to other similar products in the US, if your European products comes cheaper, they tend, or at least happen in the experience of my colleagues, to put a label of it less quality. Would you say they have such tendency of more expensive better, or it just was an unfortunate experience of my colleague?
I think it's the mindset thing. I don't want to name brands, but there are so many brands that are like running their products in millions, and everyone may not see the success or the value with those millions kind of products, but it's just a mindset that if a product is expensive, it's going to work and I'm going to get the best support or whatever, right? So it's just a mindset shift that needs to happen. Yet at the same time, a lot of the disruptive technologies that are coming out today, whether it's your artificial intelligence, machine learning, analytics to a large extent has become like a very, very mature space right now in both the geographies. People are trying to really scale products out to a lot more people besides the core target personas, which means that there's a dramatic amount of democratization that's happening with products. So I think the mentality that the more expensive a product is, the better it's going to be is slowly diminishing. I'm not denying that it wasn't a key aspect. It still continues to be, but it's a mindset that's very rapidly changing, that people want to buy products where they can see value much quicker. And their execution, implementation, and time to value cycle is not running into multiple years. That's the mindset shift that's dramatically happening, because I think with COVID-19, the amount of uncertainty that's come into the mix has risen a lot. And as a result of that, I think people no longer have multi-year, multi-million-dollar kind of budgets with them. And they're trying to really slowly secure and procure the kind of products that they want in a very, very phased manner. So I think then it becomes extremely important for you to be able to showcase whatever pricing that you have, right? Whether it's on the lower end or the higher end or in the mid end, how well can you make your customer successful? And what's the path that you have for them to see more success faster? That's what I would say.
It's very interesting. Well, to summarize, would you be able to state 3 do's and don'ts when scaling your startup to Europe and to the US?
Yeah, I think the 3 main things when you're scaling up is to understand, number one, the timing. I think I cannot emphasize enough about why timing is so crucial when you're trying to scale up. So understanding when you're truly ready for it, and understanding when the market wants you there, or when you are ready to go and grab the market, depending on whatever is the operating model that you want to choose. I think it becomes extremely important to be self-aware that whether it's at a 2 million ARR that you want to expand, or whether you want to expand at a 10 million ARR, right? So I think being critical and aware of what are your primary goals and objectives as to why do you want to expand into a different market becomes extremely critical then. A strong don't would be that the minute you get a 1 million ARR, you decide that it's time for me to expand and I'm going to now start hiring crazy left, right? So I think that is what is a complete no-no for me. And then 2, I think hiring. You have to kind of keep in mind that your scaling process is extremely dependent not just on customers or driving just growth, which is extremely outward facing, but also your internal capabilities in terms of what's the kind of leadership that you can set up, what is the mix of the leadership that you can bring on the table, like how much of it needs to be imported or how much of it needs to be local. That dramatically makes a huge difference as well. And helping the whole team take along with you and understanding what is the true level at which you need to do the hiring. I think that's fundamentally important. And then 3 is just because you happen to be successful in your domestic market, whether it's the US or the Europe, doesn't mean that you can do a copy and paste in an international market. It requires a lot more nuance, and the localization is often underestimated. Localization is not equivalent to translation. It means a lot more than that. And keeping in mind, how do you kind of understand those nuances and prepare yourself for it is what's going to be extremely critical for success. Immediately kind of getting to a point of establishing yourself as a global category winner versus a local home run success, I would say.
And connected to your last point, when you say that, it's not 100% in insurance that if you're successful here, you will be successful there, and vice versa. What would you suggest, like a moment when you realize that maybe going or scaling for overseas and or scaling to Europe, it's not for your company? And when you decide that, okay, I want just to stop, I want to close the branch, focus on one continent, is there any points you can mention here?
I think early on, it's very important for companies to understand that your early wins, what you have as customers, are not outliers. And it's very easy to fall into the trap of finding or kind of believing that those outliers is where your true market is, or is how you can expand. So I think if you're not able to quickly move out from the outlier mentality to a scalable and a repeatable model, you have your red flags already there. So understanding how can you identify the true potential of the hidden market that you can tap into is the fundamental answer to the question of whether this makes sense for you or not. And the second aspect is picking the right location in Europe is extremely important. So whichever one you pick up, make sure that you have a plan in place to kind of strike the right balance of local and external people that you need to bring in, and how you can kind of set up the whole scaling up process to find success.
And when it comes to starting finding this right point in the US, because I also, we hear more and more that Silicon Valley boomed so much that now it became very expensive to, let's say, open an office or pay your employees there. Like recently, who was it? Spotify that said that we will pay the regular US price to all the colleagues working in different markets. So does it mean that we are on the edge of changing of the entry point to the US markets? Because now also everyone moved to digital. So is the Silicon Valley still the place to be, or something new is coming up for people or in SaaS entrepreneurs in Europe to take into account?
Yeah, I think different sectors have different ways of operating. So I think when it comes to tech, fortunately or unfortunately, Silicon Valley still continues to dominate the scene. And then there is, of course, a Boston and a New York technology hub that most companies are also talking about. Of course, there are lots of recent movements in terms of, lots of companies moving towards Texas, et cetera, for different reasons. But I think the scale and the tenacity, or how do you say this, like the entire breadth of people that come together in Silicon Valley is unparalleled. Whether it's VCs, whether it's talent, whether it's networking, I think it's unparalleled compared to other sectors that are coming up. But hopefully there are some newer cities that are going to really start emerging. Obviously because of cost, obviously because of proximity of talent, and of course, in terms of how well can you really scale your company. I think that's going to be instrumental. Slowly, the trend is changing, but I still feel strongly that there's still a long way to go to kind of have it as a proven model where there is a hub number 2 or 3 that's coming up.
And the last question, they just keep on popping into my mind. So when you're scaling, so of course in the beginning you have a VC or funding in your local market. And is it a good idea when you have a couple of cases already in another market to start looking for a VC backup in US, for example, or for a US company in Europe? Or it's better to stay in this case within your local market and keep on fundraising there?
I think it depends on companies. There is no hard and fast rule here to say what works well. End of the day, it's really about your total addressable market. Most of the things are defined by your TAM. And the minute you feel that your TAM is more than 50% somewhere, you have your answer. The challenges are typically when your TAM is under 15%, 30 to 50%, and 30 to 50%, that's when the TAM happens to be, that's when it becomes a little tricky to figure out whether you should expand or not. But I think having a repeatable model in general where the amount of setup cost and customer acquisition cost is not as high as a customer win, then obviously you have your answer there as well. So I think it's at end of the day really boils down to your total addressable market. Where do you feel you can get? There are enough companies, for example, a lot of success stories recently from Israel have actually had a pretty much like a compass model, right? A compass operating model is one where your total addressable market is more than 50%, which means that your home run is definitely not making any sense for you, right? So they have completely pivoted from day one with an operating mindset of operating from the United States, for example, right? So there are a lot of unicorns in that sense too. There's a massive one, UiPath, for example, that's kind of disrupting the whole space. That's also talking about how they kind of really started in Europe, and now they're like completely pretty much out there dominating the whole world scene in the automation space. So I think you have to kind of really look at what are some of the proven strategies and operating models that a lot of these proven companies have also accomplished, and what are the trajectories at which they kind of really moved and shifted that also can kind of guide you to understand and kind of adapt yourself as well in the long run, I would say.
Okay. I don't know if you have any other questions in your mind. Okay, then I think thank you so much, Anita. We covered pretty much from every perspective. How can you scale your SaaS in Europe, but also in the US, from the marketing perspective, but also in terms of positioning your product, your pricing, and also VCs and funding. So I really hope it was helpful for our visitors. And of course, if you have any kind of questions, feel free to connect with us on LinkedIn or connect with Anita perhaps on LinkedIn. And
we'll make sure to follow up also with some more information with a presentation about what we discussed.
So thank you so much, Anita, for joining us today. It's been really insightful webinar for us and for the visitors. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Natalia and Hila, for the great opportunity. I hope this was useful, and I look forward to future collaborations as well with you. Thank you so much for providing a fantastic platform powered by Kumu, where you're bringing together all these thought-provoking topics. And I hope that entrepreneurs and future leaders are going to get immense value out of this engagement. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.